Now, the UK has confirmed a deal to work with the United States and Australia to build a new generation of nuclear attack submarines. Join me now, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat. Good to see you, Tom.
Morning, Jane. How are you?
Very well. These submarines, of course, the AUKUS Pact, all about strengthening relations between Australia, America and the UK, but also about looking at the threat that Australia faces. China, very high up on that threat. Is the UK government being a bit soft on China at the moment, do you think?
No, I think what you've just spoken about actually is about the challenges that we're seeing in the Pacific. You spoke about the North Pacific there, North Korea, and you're quite right to highlight some of the aspects on China. But this is actually about much more than that. This is about a demonstration that democracies like ours, like Australia, like the United States, can stand together against the challenges that we're facing around the world. Now, you're quite right to highlight China, but there are others as well. Iran and Russia have all, in different ways, been challenging the freedoms that we enjoy to travel, to trade, to associate, and indeed to enjoy the liberty of allies that have been threatened in places like Ukraine and around the world. So this is hugely important, and it will bring jobs to Barrow. It will bring strength and depth to our nuclear and to our naval fleets in not just the Pacific, but actually also the Indian Ocean and indeed the Atlantic.
The fact that you're bringing in other countries, when we talk about China, it feels a little bit like the government's saying, don't be too worried about China. Lord West, not that long ago, just on the 14th of March, said that it is the number one threat in his mind to world stability. Do you not agree with that?
Well, I think the integrated review that was published yesterday makes that extremely clear. The Prime Minister describes it an epoch-defining challenge. Now, that challenge comes in many different ways. You know, you have heard me speak about the threat and the challenge that China poses in different ways in different areas. And, you know, in recent months, sadly, I've had to work on closing down some illegal Chinese police stations here in the UK and making sure that Chinese citizens who may be studying here are not being threatened by the Chinese state, and making sure that British citizens or British nationals, including Hong Kongers, are free from Chinese repression here in the United Kingdom. So this is a challenge that we are facing at home and abroad, and this is absolutely not something that we're in any way ignoring. What it means, however, is we must work with friends and allies, and that's why staying in line with them and working alongside them is so important. That's why the language, yes, it matters to make sure that we're aligned with the United States and, of course, Australia, but it's also about what we do. If you look at what this package of measures includes, yeah, we've spoken about the nuclear boats, and they are very important. But we're also talking about doubling the amount of money we're going to spend on understanding China here in the United Kingdom. That means things like language learning and understanding what's going on in Beijing. And we're also, of course, talking about building up our friends and allies, and that's where the work that the Foreign Office is doing in building those partnerships in Southeast Asia and indeed in the Pacific Islands is so important.
When you talk about doing stuff as well as the language, what about TikTok? Would you like to see TikTok banned from government phones? Do you think it will be?
The Prime Minister asked me to chair the Defending Democracy Task Force only a few months ago, and that's intended to defend you as well, Jane, because your role, as you know, as a journalist is essential to democracy, just as mine as an elected official is. And so keeping those of us, and indeed many others who are part of our democratic life, part of our democratic processes, free and safe is absolutely essential. And there are many different apps that you can load onto your phone. I haven't personally loaded TikTok, for many reasons you can probably guess, but understanding exactly what the challenges that these apps pose and what they are asking for and how they're reaching into our lives is incredibly important. That's why I've asked the National Cyber Security Centre to look into this. I haven't yet had an answer, so I'm not going to give you that answer yet. I can't. But as soon as I do, you'll, I'm sure, be seeing further.
But if their advice was that it is potentially a threat, you would have no qualms about saying we should all be taking it off our phones?
Well, look, the different countries have taken different approaches. The Indian government has banned TikTok and many other apps. The US government has taken different choices in terms of their government phones. Different states in the United States have decided to ban them from different states' phones. And so different companies, different countries have taken different approaches. I mean, what's certainly clear is that for many young people, TikTok is now a news source. And just as it's quite right that we know who owns the news sources in the UK, whether it's News International or Mirror Group or whatever it happens to be, Trinity, you know, it's important that we know who owns the news sources that are feeding into our phones, and TikTok is one of them.
It's an excellent way to lose many hours, though, I found, in terms of children.
I find there are plenty of other ways in social media to do that as well.
Indeed. Let's move on to defence spending. We were talking a lot about it yesterday with this integrated review. 8 billion was the minimum that Ben Wallace said he required. It looks like it's going to be 5 billion at most. Now, when we take into account the AUKUS money as well, that knocks it down to about 1.9 million. It's not a huge sum, is it? Would you have liked to have seen a lot more?
Jane, you know, I'm a former army officer. You're never going to hear me arguing for less money for defence. I'm afraid that's not in my DNA. But the reality is this is a huge increase in defence spending, and we've got to be realistic as to what we're trying to do here. We're trying to increase our defence spending and make sure that we're more capable at a time when challenges are facing us in different ways. And you know, the AUKUS deal isn't just about nuclear boats. It's also about our own domestic security. What it is doing is it's lowering the cost for each individual boat for the Royal Navy. Now, that's a hugely important issue. We get more for our money, which is fantastic. And it's also about the way in which we support our armed forces. If you look at the 2nd Battalion, the Yorkshire Regiment, recently training with drones, you're seeing a very different kind of infantry to the one I was used to when I was serving 20 years ago. You know, 20 years ago, we went into Iraq, and I was one of those soldiers. We didn't have drones. If you wanted an overflight, you had to wait hours if you were lucky to get an F-16 or something to go over you and to give you a forward look. Now, infantry battalions are able to do that from drones. That capability is a real change and demonstrates the investment that's going in. But
you talk about the infantry. We spoke to Lord Dannatt yesterday, and that was his concern. It was the army. He said that is what is being hollowed out. That is where the money should be going, and it doesn't seem that a lot of this money is going to go there.
Well, look, I hope very much that what we're going to be looking at in terms of the army is making sure that we keep getting some of the most fantastic young people joining our armed forces. If you look at the way in which the British Army is able to recruit and retain some of the most fantastic individuals in our country and help them to serve our country in many, many different ways, actually. I mean, we talk about the front line, but of course floods and many other different areas. The armed forces have been fantastic. It's really inspiring, and I was lucky enough to be in Tracy Crouch's constituency yesterday and see some of the work that the RBLI are doing in order to support any number of different veterans where they're able to serve and serve again.
But if the government isn't putting a lot of money into the army, could you understand why people maybe would think twice about coming into that service?
Well, all I can say is speak from experience on that and say it was the most fantastic experience for me. I hugely... I got so much out of the armed forces and I got so much out of the army. It was a fantastic experience. And I hope many young people will think about it. I mean, for others, maybe it's the Navy, the Air Force, maybe the Royal Marines. There are many, many different ways of serving. And I can tell you now, as the Security Minister and responsible for some of our agencies, the National Crime Agency and organisations like MI5, offer many, many other ways to serve our country that are truly inspirational and keep us safe in ways that sometimes you'll never hear about, but are really fantastically important.
Before we let you go, the migration bill, of course, had its second reading in the House last night. Theresa May made quite a powerful speech. She, of course, spent 6 years at the Home Office. She said that this legislation on small boats won't work. We should be protecting people from modern slavery and that this will go against it. Do you think we should be listening to her here?
I always listen to Theresa May. I think she's a fantastically important colleague and actually she's a good friend, so I do listen very carefully to her. Well, one of the things that I've been watching in recent years, and I've been speaking to people in the World Food Programme and many of our embassies around the world, and when I was chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee to many of our partners in different parliaments, is that this is a challenge that we're all facing in different ways. And it's an exploitation of some of the world's most vulnerable, leading to a level of cruelty that is almost impossible to imagine. And we very often, quite understandably, focus on that last element, that 20 miles between France and the United Kingdom that people are trying to cross. Actually, this is a trade that is crossing not just France and Italy, but many parts of North Africa, leaving quite literally thousands dead in the Sahara, quite literally thousands dead in the Mediterranean. I don't know whether you remember, Jane, but I certainly see it on my memory, that photograph of Aylan Kurdi, that young boy who was drowned and washed up on a Turkish beach. This human trafficking is costing a terrible, terrible price.
But it's possible to absolutely agree with you, but also say that what Theresa May is also right. May says is also right, that it isn't going to protect people. The government's plan isn't going to protect people from modern slavery?
Well, what's absolutely clear is that every government has a responsibility to fight this appalling crime of human trafficking. There's no question about that. Every government also has a responsibility to do what it can to end modern slavery. And the first thing you can do to end modern slavery is separate those enslaved people from their captors. And that's exactly what this government is trying to do. Now, there are huge challenges. I'm not going to belittle it. There's no question that these are very, very difficult things to do. But the first thing we've got to do is stop this appalling exploitation of some of the world's most vulnerable people.
Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane.